One of the most important positions in a community would be that of a position that people probably know the least about, and that is the position of a judge and the various kinds of judges and what they cover and what they do, what they are responsible for. That's our topic tonight on the Timbuktu Report. And my guest tonight is AuBroncee Martin, who is a candidate for circuit judge here in Gainesville, Florida, and Alachua County. We're going to talk more and find out from him about his path to this race, and then what is so significant about this position as circuit judge. That's our show tonight on the Timbuktu Report. We hope that you will stay with us, like and share. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you for being here with us for the Timbuktu Report. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. My guest tonight is attorney AuBroncee Martin. Attorney Martin, thank you very much for being here on the show with us.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So Dr. Rick Stevenson is normally with us for the Timbuktu Report, and he is out of town tonight, but we certainly have some education in store for you. Attorney Martin is a candidate for circuit judge. And what area does that all cover, this race that you're running?
Well, geographically, the 8th Judicial Circuit is comprised of 6 counties. So that's Alachua, Baker, Bradford, Levy, Gilchrist, and Union counties. So it's a wide geographic range, a lot of different people, all different shapes, sizes, dispositions. So,
well, tell us what brought you to the point of wanting to be a judge, or if you would answer that for me first.
Okay, I've been an assistant public defender for 24 years, and from time to time, I think it's important to take inventory of your life. Look at what your talents, your skills, your values, and try to get the best combination of those things that would lead to you growing. And when I did that, I just naturally moved towards being a judge. I do believe very strongly in the notion that if you have something to offer that can make things a little better, then you're obligated to do so. And so from the years I observed, I think that's a good fit for me. And when the opportunity presented itself, I offered myself up for service.
So help people understand the hierarchy of judges. You have magistrates, you have the position that you're in, you have district judges, you have state Supreme Court. Just educate us on this very critical role of the role that judges play and the hierarchy.
Okay. So what's important to remember, there are basically 2 justice systems in the United States. One is the federal justice system, and then there's a state justice system. So what I'm vying for is to be a state court judge. And so there are essentially 3 types of court in the state of Florida. There are trial courts and appellate court, 2, but 3 levels. So the county court, which is the judiciary that presides over issues such as misdemeanors, civil matters that are less than $15,000, and their geographic jurisdiction are the individual counties. Hence, you heard the term Alachua County Judge or Gilchrist County Judge. And then just above that is the circuit court judge, which handles matters which involve crimes that are punishable by more than a year in the county jail, which is essentially prison, or matters in controversy, which are above $15,000, $30,000 and above, family law matters, probate, issues of that. And then you have your appellate courts, which are the district courts of appeal. There are 5 district courts of appeal, which take appeals from the circuit court. And then above them, the next layer would be the Florida Supreme Court. The circuit court would be the highest trial court. And of course, the highest appellate court would be the Supreme Court, Florida Supreme Court, rather.
So this position that you are a candidate for, did it become vacant?
Right. In the Eighth Judicial Circuit, there are 13 circuit court judges.
Mhm.
And the seat that I'm vying for was held by Judge Monica Brassanen. She decided not to seek re-election. And come this January, her term will be up. And so that opened the door for an election.
Now, you grew up in Florida. Did you always
Correct.
want to be an attorney?
No. I think the first thing that hit my mind, I was going to be a scientist. Didn't really
Oh,
know
wow.
what kind of scientist, but that was from, I don't know if you remember those old Tom Swift stories, where it was a boy scientist. I was attracted to that. That just kind of piqued my interest. And then I discovered I wasn't particularly good at math. And that was a necessity to be a scientist. And my interest moved elsewhere, which is, what your talents are, what your values are, so you need to, I think I took an inventory at that phase of my life and said, my talents aren't necessarily with mathematics and science. They go elsewhere, and led me towards the law.
So you go to law school and you go to work for the public defender's office?
Right.
Is that...
I tell people all the time, the public defender's office was my first job that didn't involve grease. I spent a lot of my time working at Albertsons and being a fry cook in the back of the house at Popeyes. And then I was able to go to the University of Florida, matriculated through there, and I was hired by the then elected public defender, Rick Parker, who was a trial practice judge. Many of the students at University of Florida may be aware of this, but every year there's a competition for trial in the trial practice classes, and Mr. Parker, Rick, who's now passed on, was a judge in my trial practice competition, and he offered me a job.
So what did that trial competition entail, do you think, that made him select you?
I don't think it was anything. I think they look at, he was looking for an individual that was comfortable in the courtroom, otherwise comfortable standing up and making an argument, comfortable making a presentation. And going back to those talents and interests and skills, I like people. I like to talk, argue, but I don't so much like to argue, but I do like to debate, and there's a difference. And I think he saw that in me and offered me a job.
And what was it that, when he offered you that job, was your thought that you would be there for 25 years? And then what did you think your path was going to be?
No, I did not think I would be there for 25 years. I have to begin by when I went to law school, I had no intent whatsoever of being a trial lawyer. What the vision that I had for myself was to get a job as a member of a general counsel's office at a university. I was always very active in my university, and what I saw that appealed to me are the faculty and staff, administrators at universities, and how they help students. And I was like, that would be the path for me. But two things happened in law school. Once I took my first trial practice class, and I was hooked. And then also the notion of working in big law, and that's the term, like corporate law, in which in a number of universities, that is the emphasis. Most students rack up a great deal of debt, and I'm one of them attending law school. So the goal is to go find you employment at the biggest firm that you can, so that you can recoup some of that. And I was walking along that path the best that I could, and I, as going through the process, and it can be a bit of a process, I learned this is not for me. didn't align with my values. You got your talent, your interests, and your values, and corporate law did not align with my values. And when I had the opportunity to work at the public defender's office, I jumped on it.
And so how has the work in the public defender's office prepared you for a role as a circuit judge?
And here is one of the things that I think points to my unique qualifications to be a judge. If you look at what happens in the broader scale, we were all very excited when we had the first African American female Supreme Court justice. And what was even just as much remarkable, she was an African American woman. She was one of the first public defender to be on the United States Supreme Court. She's one of the very few people who actually represented clients, who actually knows on firsthand basis what it means to those individual people to be impacted by the power of the court. And since for the past 24 years, I've seen those individuals, looked at them in the eye, know the impact of the situations that they find themselves in involving the criminal justice system. I see that firsthand. I see how it impacts their families, their children, their jobs. And I think that's an important perspective for a judge to have. One of the things that is challenging to the criminal justice system or the justice system at large is that there seems to be a legitimacy problem, an issue that the public does not seem to trust that the courts are going to fulfill their number one core mission of being fair and impartial. Because there is such a notion that judges are, by being human to some extent, are going to be biased against them. And it starts from because people don't expect that judges know where they're coming from. They haven't lived their life experience, that they don't reflect who they see themselves as the client up on that bench. And as an assistant public defender, I have not necessarily walked in their shoes, but I've walked next to plain ordinary people who are out there struggling. And I think that would add to the sense that I, not necessarily having sympathy, but empathy, understanding of where they're coming from, and can analyze the situation more critically, and in hopes be more fair and impartial at the end.
So speak to the role of a public defender, and what you have done specifically. You talked about you having developed empathy. How does that play a role on the bench?
Here's the thing. So a judge has to apply the law to the facts of the case. And when any human endeavor, the facts are always going to be colored by their individual experiences, their perspective. The world looks a lot different from down low as opposed to up high. And you have to, even though you're, as a judge, you're going to be somewhat detached, you have to be in order to be objective. One of the things that my experience has taught to me is that it helps to think, be empathetic, not, and I have to reemphasize, not necessarily sympathetic, but be able to try to envision to some extent where an individual's path has began, where it is now, and where it's going to lead to, in order to kind of make an appropriate decision about where justice lies. Always look into what the law says, but there's always this area in which judgment must be imposed. There's always this area where you have to be, for lack of a better term, use a little discernment. And I think my experience as a public defender, dealing with all types of people, all types of stories, have given me the experience that allows me to do that.
So you had an election earlier, about a month or so ago, and now you're in a runoff election, and that election will take place November 4th or 6th,
November 8th.
November 8th. Okay, November 8th. Um, what is it that a circuit court judge, what is the process in making a decision? You talked about empathy, you talked about combining empathy with the law. How does a circuit court judge come to put together the right formula for making a just decision?
And here is, I think there lies the rub. I don't think there is any precise formula. One size fits all can never be. And I think you need to begin with that. And to give you an example of, and this is more in line than criminal law, people are always very interested in sentencing as far as what the judge does. And I got to tell you, there are three branches of government. And when in terms of sentencing, you see the courts first because it's the person that sits up high and has the robe on. However, the state legislature at the very beginning puts laws in place that dictate certain sentences that the judge has no choice but to apply mandatory minimums. The prosecutor's office, they are the people who bring the charges, and hence trigger, depending on what charge is brought by the state attorney's office, dictate some of those mandatory minimums. There's also a sentencing law referred to as the criminal punishment code that to some extent does have a formula imposed that if a person meets a certain threshold as far as their prior criminal history, that's going to mandate a certain sentence. However, there are going to be certain exceptions in which a judge, based on the individual facts of the case, the individual history and circumstances of the defendant, the impact that this has had on the community at large, or the individual alleged victim, can make a decision about what justice required. And it's kind of is specified in the statute. The judge has to look to see if there are certain factors in that case that are enumerated in the statute created by the state legislature that will allow for what we will refer to as a downward departure, moving from that mandatory lowest permissible sentence under what we refer to as the criminal punishment code to something less than that. And the legislature has outlined reasons that you can lawfully do that. And if the court does find through clear and convincing evidence that that does exist, then there's a next phase that the judge moves on to see, based on the facts of that individual case, does justice require a downward departure? So I tell people, first we have to see under the law, is a particular sentence going to be lawful? And if it's not, then that ends there. If it is lawful, then I have to use my individual judgment to see if a particular sentence is warranted there. And so it always is a two-step process in my mind, that you have to look for what the law is, and then comparing the facts in the law, see what justice required. And that really is an internal decision that's made by the individual judge.
And when you say a downward,
this is a bit of legal jargon in which we call it a downward departure.
Break it down for us.
All right. So specifically in the state of Florida, there's a statute referred to as the criminal punishment code. What the criminal punishment code does is assign a numerical value to every crime that a person could possibly be facing. And then there's another numerical value that's assigned to every crime that a person has in their past. So in essence, whatever crime that they're looking at that they're presently being sentenced on, if there is any criminal history that they have, you assign separate numerical values to them. You can also get numerical points for injury to the victim, gang affiliation, use of a firearm. There are whether or not you are currently under any sort of supervision, you can get points for that. And if you add all those numbers together, and if it's above a threshold, which in this case would be 44 points, then anything above would be a mandatory prison sentence. Anything below 44, but above 22 is 21 rather, would be a discretionary state prison sentence, and then anything below that would be any non-state prison sanction. So those calculations do come into, and once you figure that, determine that, then the judge, if a sufficient argument is made, could choose to downward depart, go from one level to the other, if it's a mandatory state prison sentence, based on those factors that I had made reference to earlier.
I wonder, Attorney Martin, I wonder if people understood more about what the sentencing process is. You would think just the fact that it's illegal that you wouldn't want to do it. But I wonder how many people really understand if you do this and then you do this and then if you do this and you have a weapon with you or not have a weapon, how that impacts. Well, I don't understand it to begin with.
Well, I will tell you this.
I don't understand why we don't want to just do right. That's what I'm saying. Not that I don't understand what you said.
And that is a fair assessment that people should always act morally and rightly. But the reasons people do not are varied. There's mental illness, drug addiction. And if we had a solution to that problem, I think this would be a much better world. But it is complicated. And, we've had, for instance, you have mandatory minimums in which, as I recall, when they have been around for quite some time, there was quite the ad campaign publicizing that. What causes people to commit crimes is complex. And I don't think it's a simple answer to it. I think, and this is as part of the justice system, it is incumbent upon judges to treat everyone on an individual basis, make a determination to the best they can whether or not a person, if their motivation for committing crime is truly malignant or not. But I don't know if I have a great answer for that, other than I know it's complex and it takes a lot of work to strive to do the right thing.
You're a candidate for 8th Circuit Judge. Explain to our viewers why it's called Circuit Judge.
It's you remember the old West movies where you had the judge rides the circuit? It's kind of the same thing, because historically judges are, and they still are, relatively rare creatures. The judge would have to ride from area to area to mete out justice. And that area was referred to as a circuit. The circuit judge would ride from community to community, being a judge. And so that's where that comes from. It's just that it describes the judges are mobile to some extent. And we are. The modern circuit judge does have assignments in various other counties. And so if I am elected, I might have a family law docket, for example, maybe in Gilchrist or Baker County, and then have a civil docket here in Alachua County, or a criminal docket here in Alachua County, and do some civil work in another county, and just move throughout the week to those various locations.
You would hold court in those communities. They don't come to you.
Yeah, each county has their own courthouse, and so the citizens who reside in the individual county would travel to their individual county courthouse. The circuit judge will move between the county courthouses. Yes.
AuBroncee Martin, attorney that is a candidate for 8th Circuit Court Judge. What are the skills that voters should be looking for in selecting the next circuit court judge for the 8th District?
Well, on a basic level, You're looking for a certain amount of legal acumen, and I think that comes from experience uh, of actually doing the work. Uh, as I described earlier, the circuit court is a trial court. Uh, Trials are held in circuit court, so a candidate or an attorney who is vying for that position should have knowledge of the rules of evidence, um, the rules of procedure, but more importantly, because I think you can learn all that. Because just because you were a defense attorney or a criminal defense attorney or a civil defense attorney or a plaintiff's attorney, um, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve because it's a different role. You are moving from being an advocate to a person who's more of, and most judges are not necessarily going to be the finder of fact. We do have jury trials, so we're going to be a gatekeeper. Think of a judge as more of a referee, making sure that the rules are applied, making sure what evidence comes before a jury, or if the procedures are being followed in any pretrial matter. So number one from all that is a knowledge of the law, but as I don't even want to number a person who has the ability to listen and be open-minded and is willing to be educated, because a judge has a hard job to do, and since it's their job to make the calls, their decision are important, but it should be open to listen to what every side has on what that call should be. And I think that's the number one. Is, right, are you open to listening?
How do you, yeah, how do you come to this position and leave all of your biases that might exist behind and just truly look at the facts? How difficult is that?
And here, and this is, I think, another a bit of a misunderstanding about what lawyers do. Here in our system, um, lawyers handle all sides. Particularly, you might gravitate to one side or the other, but when you graduate from law school, you can move to be, I'm going to be a plaintiff's attorney. I'm going to be a state attorney, and then I can go get a job as a public defender and defend those same people that 2 years ago I was prosecuting. What we come from a mindset first is that you are a lawyer, and then you are trained to analyze the facts and present arguments, and to some extent, the best argument is based on an understanding of what the other side is going to say. And what I do as a public defender is quite often I have to give harsh and bad news to my clients and say they have a good case. You need to understand that we can say this and we can say that, but the likelihood is that we will not prevail because the law is against us or the facts are against us. So here you have the advocate and the counselor section, and we all are trained, and the best advocates are the ones that understand that dual role here. So it is a bit of a learning curve, but it's not alien. It's not something that we are stuck in one gear. I think you need to be effective as any lawyer. You need to be able to move between gears.
What makes you the best person for this position to wear the robe in the Eighth Circuit judge position?
I got to go back to what I said earlier about professional diversity. I have the requisite experience. I have been an avid servant of this community, been involved in helping this community both inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom. But what we need, although we've had many fine judges here in the Eighth Judicial Circuit, is very rare for an assistant public defender to become a judge. And when you have a duty, as the judiciary has, to be fair and impartial, but not only had to actually be fair and impartial, but we need to portray or send a signal that we are, in fact, going to be fair and impartial. And if everyone who happens to be a judge come from the same professional background, the same personal background, the public is not getting that signal. And the justice system does not work if the public, the community, the people that the judicial system serves does not trust that they're going to do their job. It just doesn't work. And this is not to say anything about is wrong with anyone who's up there. It's just that this is something that's needed. It is needed that you have a different point of view represented on the bench, because quite frankly, most of the judges come from a background of being prosecutors or civil attorneys who work in large firms. And that's not just the 8th Judicial Circuit, that's nationwide. And when you have someone, and I feel strongly, I am qualified. I have those skills. I've been a trial lawyer for 24 years. I know and understand what it means to actually be in a trial, but I also have that added benefit of I have that experience of being a public defender that's lacking on the bench here in the 8th Judicial Circuit. Right now, I can think of one circuit court judge who has had experience as a principal. Her principal career as being a legal service lawyer, and one other who had spent 30 years as a criminal defense attorney in private practice. And I think those two perspectives are desperately needed. And I think my perspective is desperately needed. And when you have different professional experiences represented in the bench, the notion that we are not a monolith, that we are not going to look at a case one way and then thereby signaling that there's going to be some folk who come before a judge and just from right off the bat don't have a chance. And I think that's very important, that judges always signal that regardless of who you are, where you're from, what you believe in, when you bring a matter before the judge, that you must believe you're going to have just as good a chance as anyone else at prevailing. And my particular story, life experience, I think will contribute to that feeling that the judiciary, at the very least here locally, will be fair and impartial.
Attorney AuBroncee Martin, he is a candidate for the 8th Circuit Court judge position that includes 6 counties in North Central Florida. 6 counties in North Central Florida. The election is the 8th of November. We certainly encourage everybody to vote all the time because it is your constitutional responsibility, not just a right, but it's your responsibility to go and vote, and we encourage everybody to do that. Attorney Martin, I really, really appreciate you sharing this evening with us and sharing your knowledge. If you are watching this on YouTube, I encourage you to subscribe. If you're on Facebook, like and share so that others can hear this message. I think people don't have an appreciation for what it means, these judges' positions, nor do they understand the role of judges. And that's why I'm happy to have been able to allow this platform to be an avenue for sharing the information, the valuable information that you shared with us tonight. Attorney Martin, thank you very much, and best of luck to you on November 8th with your election.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And we thank all of you for joining us tonight for the Timbuktu Report. Our goal here at the Timbuktu Report is to enlighten, inspire, and to educate, and I trust that you got all of that tonight. We will be back here next Thursday for more inspiring conversations. We appreciate all of you watching. I'm Pamela Marshall for the entire team here at the Timbuktu Report. Thank you for joining us at the Wellness Radio TV. There is healing at the well. Make it a fantastic moment.